All right, we're going to continue with lecture 19. This is lecture 19, part 2, microbiology. We're going to discuss some diseases of the eyes, microbial infections of the eye. Well, first of all, the, the surface of the eye is covered with a thin epithelium, which is transparent and is called the conjunctiva. And inflammation of that is called conjunctivitis. And it can occur with bacterial infections or viral infections or some physical injury or protozoa infections. The most common cause is, of conjunctivitis is the bacteria Haemophilus influenza. But it can also be caused by other bacteria or viruses or protists, protozoa. It's often associated with unsanitary contact lenses. Some people even take their lens and wet it in their mouth and before putting it into their eyes. Quite incredible. Anyhow, with contact lens use increases it's a risk for development of infection and conjunctivitis. Another type of infection, microbial infection, bacterial infection of the eye, is due to Neisseria gonorrhea. And the disease is called, that's the bacteria that causes it, and the disease is called neonatal gonorrheal ophthalmia. Now, this is a case of the newborn picking up the bacteria during the birthing process as it passes through out of the uterus through the vagina, and the infection is picked up in the newborn's eyes. This has been pretty much completely prevented by standard procedure of dabbing antibiotics into the eyes immediately after birth. Every baby gets antibiotics in the eyes to prevent Neisseria gonorrhea ophthalmia. Well, another major problem is the bacterial organism Chlamydia trachomatis. Now, trachoma is quite a serious disease. This is the disease. This is the bacterial organism, the name of the bacterial organism, the genus and the species, right? So trachoma is a major problem worldwide. Infection with chlamydia in the eyes can cause permanent scarring and lead to blindness. There's also another type of disease it causes, which is called inclusion conjunctivitis, which is transmitted to the baby's eyes as it is born or through swimming pool water. It can be treated with tetracycline, however. Trachoma can also be treated with early on with antibiotics, but if it's neglected, then it leads to blindness. It's one of the major causes of blindness worldwide. Okay, let's go to microbial diseases in the nervous system. We'll start with bacterial and move then on to viral infections. Remember that the nervous system is quite protected, quite tightly closed. Portals of entry into the nervous system for microorganisms would be skull or backbone fractures, medical procedures that involve piercing the sheathing that's around the nervous system, entry along the nerve sheath of peripheral nerves or through the blood or lymph into the central nervous system. It's not easy to get into the central nervous system for microorganisms, but they can get in and cause serious infections. Bacteria can grow in the cerebrospinal fluid, the CSF, in the subarachnoid space. The blood-brain barrier, which is a tighter kind of endothelial lining of the blood vessels in the brain, can actually make it difficult to get drugs into the central nervous system, making therapy more difficult. A person who takes drugs orally or even IV, it's more difficult to get them into the central nervous system because of that blood-brain barrier that exists. Kind of problems that you get with infection are meningitis, which is inflammation of the meninges, the lining of the brain and the spinal cord, the lining of the central nervous system, and encephalitis, which is inflammation of the brain itself. So here you see a diagram just to remind you of the structure of the meninges and cerebrospinal fluid within that space around the central nervous system. What you have around the brain is of course the skull bone, and then three layers: the dura mater, arachnoid mater, and pia mater. And what these do is they completely envelop the brain in a quite a tight kind of seal to prevent entry of any microorganisms or molecules that shouldn't be getting into your central nervous system. CNS is more sensitive to quite a few different toxins that you might take in. In the subarachnoid space, just between the arachnoid matter and the pia mater, there's a space, and that is filled with CSF. The same layers, also connective tissue layers, also membrane layers, also surround the spinal cord. The dura mater, arachnoid mater, and pia mater all surrounded, and again you have a subarachnoid space filled with CSF. Okay, now in terms of bacterial diseases in the nervous system, bacterial diseases can cause bacterial meningitis. There are a number of different bacteria that can cause bacterial meningitis, and I've listed these in the order of the most common cause going to the less common causes. Streptococcus pneumonia is the most common cause, Neisseria meningitis the second, and Haemophilus influenza the third most common, the three most common bacterial organisms that can cause bacterial meningitis. Meningitis is often not that easy type of infection to diagnose, but it is associated very clearly with having a stiff neck. The person has fever and a headache, but if there's also a stiffness in the neck muscles, then that's not a good sign. It can be initially fever, headaches, stiff neck, stiffness in the neck, then nausea and vomiting can quickly progress to convulsions and coma. Diagnosis is by taking a sample of CSF and spinning it down in a centrifuge and doing a gram stain on what gets spun down. Treatment, again, I don't do treatment. Treatments change. I took this out of a textbook probably quite a while back. It may not have changed, but I'm not going to teach you treatment. I'll teach you about the infections, the signs and symptoms, the information associated with the organism, what it can cause in a person, but I won't do treatment. You should understand also that what you learn now in terms of anything about treatment will change over time, and sometimes can change dramatically, and sometimes can change very quickly. But certainly whatever you learn about treatment now, in 10 years' time, much of it will have changed, probably much improved. It's always evolving. So you have to remain flexible in understanding that different treatments will be introduced regularly. Okay. However, the characteristics of the diseases more or less stay the same, the ones that have been recognized, well recognized and characterized. Okay, look at the fatality rates. They are serious. These are data from the United States, but these are serious fatality rates for each of these types of infections. This is the order of most common cause to the least common cause: strep, pneumonia, Neisseria meningitidis, Haemophilus influenza. In terms of meningitis caused by Streptococcus pneumonia, it's properly known as pneumococcal meningitis. Streptococcus pneumonia is a gram-positive organism. About 70% of people are healthy carriers of this organism. They carry it, they don't have any disease process going on. It's carried in the nasopharynx, perfectly normal. The disease, pneumococcal meningitis, is most common in children between the ages of 1 month and 4 years, and the mortality can be quite high. It is also has a very high mortality in elderly patients, but is well protected against by vaccination. In terms of Neisseria meningitidis, meningococcal meningitis, as opposed to the previous one, which was pneumococcal meningitis. This is a gram-negative organism. Again, a certain percentage of people, not very large, but a certain percentage of people are healthy carriers within their nasal pharynx. The infection itself starts as a throat infection with a rash, and then proceeds to infecting getting into the CSF and causing meningitis. Again, there is a vaccine, although it's only available against certain variants or serotypes of the bacteria. The last cause, most common cause of meningitis is Haemophilus influenza, mostly occurring in children. It is prevented by this vaccine, which stands for Haemophilus influenza type B, I believe, which is regularly given to children, typically young children, 6 months to 4 years. It is part of the normal throat microbiota, found normally within the throat, but if it gains entry into the CSF or central nervous system, it will cause meningitis. Prior to development of the vaccine in the 80s, there were a reasonable number of cases, but that quickly dropped off. The vaccine was introduced here at this point. You can see these are these bars. In this bar graph are the number of vaccines delivered. This is data from the United States. And as it became more widely distributed, these are millions of doses. As it became more widely distributed, the incidence of the disease dropped off significantly. Vaccination is a powerful thing. This is the vaccine, again, is called HIV vaccine, Haemophilus influenza type B. Okay, let's go to tetanus. That was meningitis. Tetanus is a disease caused by the gram-positive endospore-forming organism, Clostridium tetani. It is an obligate anaerobe. It has to grow in the absence of oxygen, so it's often found in deep or penetrating wounds. If a wound is deeper, then with the wound you get damage to blood vessels so that oxygen isn't delivered into the area. And if it's deep, then it's not getting any oxygen from the outside. And with those kind of deep stab penetrating wounds, if you get introduction of the endospores of the bacterium, you can get the disease tetanus. The problem is the toxin released by these, called tetanospasmin, which is released from dead bacterial cells. It will block relaxation at the neuromuscular junction, or relaxation response in muscle, and so as the muscle contracts, it remains contracted. An older name for this disease is lockjaw, because one of the earliest signs of the disease process was that people would start getting a stiff jaw till it was finally clenched, and then that progresses and eventually all their muscles are clenched, and people in the last stages look like this, with all their muscles throughout their body contracted and clenched. Prevention is by vaccination with a toxoid, the tetanus toxoid. Remember, there are several different diseases that are mediated by toxins produced by bacteria, in which they purify the toxin and then inactivate it. An inactivated toxin is a toxoid, and then they vaccinate people with the toxoid, so you develop an antibody against the toxin. The vaccination is the T in the DTP vaccine. And also you get a booster. In fact, you need a booster every 10 years. This, of course, this kind of prevention by vaccination is artificial acquired active immunity. It's artificial because it's by vaccination, not by natural infection. And it is active immunity because it is your immune system that is responding. Your specific adaptive immune system is responding to the antigen. The antigen is the tetanus toxoid, and you're producing antibody molecules. If a person is exposed to the virus, then they have to be treated not just by vaccination alone, because vaccination will only have an effect start having an effect after about 10 days, 2 weeks. And by that time, if you're exposed to the virus, you're going to be dead. So they also will treat with tetanus immune globulin. They'll give the person immune globulin. That's a fraction of the gamma globulin, fraction of the serum that contains antibodies, and they give antibody against, the antibody against the tetanus toxin. This, of course, is artificial acquired passive immunity. Artificial because it's done by injection, and passive because it's not your immune response that's reacting. You are being passively given you're not producing the immune antibodies. You're receiving them passively. Okay, another bacterial infection that affects the central nervous system is botulism, caused by Clostridium botulinum. Again, all members of this genus Clostridium are gram-positive endospore-forming obligate anaerobes. Intoxication in this case comes by ingesting the toxin. It takes tiny amounts of the toxin. Often this is due to food poisoning, where some food item has been sealed into a jar or can, and the container contains some endospores, and they will grow because it's an anaerobic environment and produce toxin. It does not take much toxin to being produced inside a container to cause botulism. It is in fact so toxic that you won't, even though it has the bacteria growing in it, you wouldn't notice that part. And you take in some of the botulinum toxin, and it causes a block in the release of neurotransmitter at the neuromuscular junction. So botulism will cause what's called flaccid paralysis. In other words, a person is paralyzed, they will get paralysis of muscles. Prevention is by proper canning and also by the use of nitrites in processed meats to prevent, which addition of nitrites prevents endospore germination. Nitrates can be added. Nitrate is red in color, that's why sausages are red. It can also be created by smoking the meat, and you get a red color because nitrates are produced. Treatment if a person has ingested the botulinum toxin is by very intensive supportive care and receiving the antitoxin antibody against the botulinum toxin. So again, this is an artificial acquired passive immune therapy. Infants are particularly sensitive to botulism, and it can result often in the getting not so much the toxin, but the actual organism growing in their intestines. A common enough occurrence is because this might occur with feeding unpasteurized honey to children. You wouldn't think that honey would be a problem, but it can contain spores, and if it's not pasteurized, it should not be eaten by younger children. Botulism can also occur by growth of the bacteria in a wound, and as a result of the endospores getting in and growing in the person. But the most common cases are due to intoxication because of growth of the organism in some kind of canned or sealed jar. I'm not going to talk about this slide. Okay, the next bacteria that I'm going to talk about is Mycobacterium leprae, which, as you should know, is an acid-fast organism. All members of the genus Mycobacterium are acid-fast organisms. This one, Mycobacterium leprae, is the cause of the disease leprosy. It is a disease which grows in skin cells and peripheral nerve cells. It cannot be grown in culture, but needs tissue to grow in. Transmission occurs from one person to the next due to quite prolonged contact. It is not really highly contagious. It was a much feared disease, and people with the disease were isolated quite often. In many countries, they were isolated in leper colonies, separate areas, often on an island, separated from others because everyone feared the disease so much. There are two major forms of the disease. There's actually a range of the disease between the tuberculoid form and the lepromatous form. Lepromatous form is a progressive type of the disease. It has effects, it's not what you see here in this photograph below of someone with the lepromatous form. It's not due to actually direct injury to the fingers. It is due to the fact that the organism will damage nerves and cause loss of sensation. When a person loses sensation, they'll get injuries to their if they lose sensation in their fingers, they'll get injuries that can be quite serious, and with time will actually lose fingers or lips or nose. It depends what areas of numbness they have. Certainly not a pretty disease by any means. Okay, those were bacterial diseases of the nervous system. Now we'll talk about viral diseases, viral infections. The first one we'll discuss is poliovirus, which causes the disease poliomyelitis. The virus is actually quite stable in the environment. It is carried by a person, but can remain quite viable and stable outside of an infected person. It is transmitted by ingestion. I believe typically it's an oral fecal route of infection. Initial symptoms are mild sore throat and nausea, but then with the virus, with a person being infected, eventually the virus can enter the central nervous system, and it has a affinity. In other words, it will bind and infect nerve cells, particularly in the motor neurons in the upper spinal cord. So you get motor neurons. I remind you that if you look at a cross section of the spinal cord, where this is the dark matter surrounded by white, that this is the dorsal horn, and this is the ventral horn, and it's in this area of the ventral horn that you have the motor neuron cell bodies, and it is in here, in this area here, that you get the virus infecting the cells, resulting in cell death and paralysis. And the paralysis can actually, if it's high enough in the spinal cord, it can be paralysis of the respiratory muscles. So the motor cells die, and you end up with paralysis. And this was a terrible disease, but it is extremely rare now because it can be very well prevented by vaccination. Only humans carry or can get poliovirus, and therefore there's no animal reservoir of the disease, and therefore it is just like smallpox, and therefore is a good candidate for eradication, complete eradication, if enough people are vaccinated in the world to prevent cases. In the early 1950s, Salk developed a vaccine, and Sabin also, and these two saved millions and millions of lives. Many people died from it or were paralyzed for the rest of their life. These inactivated or weakened kinds of vaccines are no longer used. Now it's enhanced inactivated vaccine. That's the type that's given now. The disease still occurs. The natural wild type of the poliovirus is still present in a limited number of countries. I believe Afghanistan, Pakistan, and maybe a third country. Very close to eradication, but still cases present being transmitted in the human population, but quite close. Vaccine programs, people don't understand, and therefore they fear, and they're susceptible to misinformation, and that's what's holding back complete successful eradication of the disease. As you can see, the Salk vaccine was introduced in the early 50s. And this is a number of cases. It's a logarithmic scale. This is the year. And as you can see, with the introduction of the vaccine, and especially, again, also this one is delivered even easier than the Salk vaccine, so that the number of cases dropped off dramatically. And in these years, you have this insert covers those years, and there's very, very, very few cases now, but still present. Poliovirus, as I said, only occurs in humans, no animal reservoir. In 2018, there were 33 cases of what's called wild-type polio infections worldwide. In 2019, that has increased because of increasing difficulty of entry into some areas in Afghanistan and northwest Pakistan, which borders right on Afghanistan. But there is a global WHO Global Polio Eradication Initiative and it is in fact the next most likely major human infectious disease that will hopefully be eradicated with some luck and effort and education. Okay, the next one that we're going to talk about is rabies, the rabies virus. Rabies virus is transmitted by an animal bite or by in the saliva of the animal. Any contact with the animal is dangerous, can easily transmit to a human. The virus first multiplies in skeletal muscle fibers, but then can enter into the nervous system. You get brain cells infected, causing an encephalitis. Initial symptoms may include spasms in the mouth and the pharynx associated with increased saliva production, and also an unusual symptom is hydrophobia, fear of water. In animals that are infected, you can get different kinds of responses, furious rabies or paralytic rabies. In furious rabies, they can be quite angry, aggressive, restless, highly excitable. Or with paralytic rabies, they seem sort of placid, unaware of their surroundings. Maybe even the dog may, if it's an infected dog, for example, may even appear to be lost. But, you know, it is not a smart idea to approach a strange animal that you don't know, a dog that you're not familiar with. Better if the dog seems lost to you, to call the SPCA. Some individuals get vaccinated against rabies if they're doing the kind of work that might bring them into exposure to the virus. There are a lot of wild animals, not on the island of Montreal, but outside of being on an island is helpful for certain diseases. Outside of Montreal, there's many different animals that carry it that you might run into. And certainly people who work with rescue of wild animals or trapping, whatever, do get vaccinated, pre-exposure vaccination, prophylaxis. This, of course, is artificially acquired active immunity. They are being injected with, vaccinated with the killed virus, and their own immune system actively responds and develops antibody. However, just as with tetanus, it is a rapidly progressing serious disease, and so post-exposure, it is not just vaccination that's carried out, but also you get an immune globulin antibody injection, which is, of course, artificially acquired passive immunity. It's injected, so it's artificial, and it's passive. It's not your immune response that is providing the antibody, but you're artificially getting the passively receiving antibody. So you have both immune globulin and vaccination for treatment of rabies if you get exposed to a rabid animal. Highly infectious, actually, and serious, rapidly progressing. Well, you can look at this, fairly self-explanatory. The rabies virus occurs in a number of different animals, as I said, and this map shows that in the northern regions, North America, you have it in fox, but you also have it here where we live in skunks and raccoons. There's a large area in the United States where you have it, and these are different species of skunk. So in the end, you have some really vast areas that you can get it, pick it up from an animal. Arizona fox, so there's in this area here, California skunk, raccoons all through eastern United States. And when you see a map like this, where the extent of the where the extent of the infected animals exactly follows the Canada-US border, you can be quite certain it's on the Canadian side too. So this is not a well-defined area. There are going to be raccoons carrying it in eastern Canada. These are the kind of animals that carry it. This is separate data from the United States, and there are a number of animals that you could run into, and you certainly run into them in your backyard even. Raccoons and skunks. There are bats, of course. Foxes, there are not too many. I had a fox in my neighborhood once, but it disappeared after a short while. Other domesticated animals can carry it. It's a serious problem. Every year I get asked about squirrels. No, squirrels do not carry rabies. Here's another map that's just of Canada and shows different animals that carry it. You can see that the dots represent cases where they were identified, the animal as infected. Skunk, fox, raccoon. Ovine is I can't remember ovine. Bovine is cow. Caprine might be horse. Cat, dog. No, equine is horse. Caprine, I'm trying to remember. There's two here I don't remember, caprine and ovine. So there are a lot of different animals that can carry it. They even have llama here. I don't know. I suppose llamas are ranched. Some raccoon. Here you see a case in New Brunswick. So it is possible to run into it, certainly, and you have to be careful. Okay, so there are also, and it's important to, and it's certainly important to understand that there are also other viruses that can affect the nervous system, and these are arboviruses. All arboviruses are insect vector carried, so arthropod borne means that it's carried by an insect. These viruses can all be controlled by controlling the mosquito and its particular mosquitoes that will carry it. Different strains of mosquitoes carry different types of the viruses. Sometimes they use sentinel animals to monitor how common it is in the environment. You put an animal, uninfected animal in a cage out, like a chicken. You put out a chicken in a cage in the forest and then collect it the next day and collect it soon after, and then later check it for presence of the virus, because it's going to get bitten by mosquitoes, and that way you can tell if there is the virus in the environment in the insect population, where the insects are a vector. The kind of viruses that cause these arboviral encephalitis include the Eastern equine encephalitis, Western equine encephalitis, St. Louis encephalitis, California, and West Nile virus, which we've described before. It's a viral disease carried in birds and transmitted by mosquitoes between birds, but can also, if an infected mosquito bites a human, can be transmitted to a human. West Nile virus first appeared in New York and after New York City, first described in Africa and West Nile region in Africa, and then transmitted to New York City, probably by a bird caught in the hold of a ship, and spread from there throughout North America, and now it's widespread throughout the entire continent. These are serious neural diseases. Okay, so now we talked about bacterial infections in the nervous system, viral infections. We'll talk a little bit about prions. which cause transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. This is, as you know, prion is non-cellular. It does not contain any DNA or RNA. Prions are protein. They are a altered form of a natural protein found in the central nervous system. And exposure to the prion protein into a normal nervous system will cause a change of the normally occurring protein into the prion type. The disease is found, TSE, or transmissible spongiform encephalopathy, can be caused in sheep by and the disease is called sheep scrapie, or in cows, and the disease is called mad cow disease or bovine spongiform encephalopathy. In humans, and there the disease is called variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, or BCJD. There was and is now has been eradicated a form in Papua New Guinea called Kuru, but that was actually eliminated many years ago because it was understood how it was transmitted, and they stopped that system of transmission. There is a disease that occurs in humans which takes a long time to form, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Variable Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in humans can occur quite quickly. What you should understand is that it is transmitted by ingestion or transplantation or inheritance of from one generation to the next. But ingestion is a typical kind of transmission. And so it is believed with good evidence that cows, developed it from being fed sheep waste products from sheep, the internal organs of sheep that were slaughtered, and it was processed into a high protein meal. And then humans were infected by eating infected prion carrying beef, and so humans developed variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease. It is chronic and fatal, and there is no treatment. A recent development in North America has been another type of prion disease called chronic wasting disease. It is found in deer, elk, and moose, which might be caprine. The term, that word, I'm going to check. C-A-P-R-I-N-E may refer to this kind of animal, these group of animals. Just like equine refers to horses, bovine is an adjective for cows. I believe caprine refers to these. That was what we were just discussing with rabies. No, I have to look. I have to look it up. Sorry. So chronic wasting disease has been recognized to develop in North America in these animal populations, and in fact it's been spreading, and is certainly a problem because there are a lot of hunters who hunt deer, elk, and moose, and eat their what they shoot, what they're able to successfully hunt. So these dots represent captive populations. There are a lot of places where deer are raised commercially in penned areas, farms, and the meat is farmed that way. Okay, so that is the end of Lecture 19, Part 2. And that's the end of Lecture 19.